Voilà Suzuki encore. Et derrière.
Minnesota is in Montreal to take on the Canadiens tonight. The Wild have absolutely dominated Montreal over the course of the last decade, with a record of 18-1-0 in their last 19 meetings between the two teams. The Wild are on the second half of a back-to-back, having traveled from Toronto to Montreal overnight, while the Canadiens are on several days rest, so I really want to see Montreal come out and look quick against the Minnesota team that should be totally tired. There are multiple changes to the Habs lineup to get to. Owen Beck, Jacob Fowler, return to Laval, which is, in my opinion, good for both of them. They can get more reps, continue to develop, rather than sitting out. Jaden Struble moves into the lineup in place of Arbor Jacki. I'm not crazy about Struble playing, but I think giving Arbor the occasional day off, especially against some of the more skilled teams in the league like the Wild, is a good idea. So it makes sense to give Struble a game here, I guess. Alexandre Texier, day-to-day with a lower body injury, so he is out of the lineup, and making his return in his first game since November 15th of last year is Kirby Dach. Dach will be on Suzuki's wing with Caufield on the first line, and I'm extremely excited to see how he performs. I'm still a big believer in Dach, and I really hope he can come out and make an immediate impact on the first line. His game and his build are very similar to that of Juraj Slafkovsky, so I feel like he's a natural fit on that first line. The other forward lines remain unchanged, while the defense pairings do get mixed around. Matheson and Dobson stay together, but Hudson and Struble get teamed up, while Carrier and Goulet work together. The goaltenders for tonight for Minnesota, it's Jesper Wallstedt, 12-4-4 with a .264 goals against average and a .916 save percentage. And in net for the Montreal Canadiens, it's Jakub Dobeš. Dobeš, 14-5-3 with a .301 goals against average and an .888 save percentage. The Canadiens come out on fire, and they put shot after shot towards Wallstedt in this one. They definitely look fresh and ready to take advantage of a road-weary Wild team. The pace did slow after the initial flurry, but Montreal did well to manage the more structured portion of the period, and they still came away with the better chances on net. Dobeš was very rarely tested, and most of Minnesota's looks ended up going high or wide. Their best early look came on a shot that went off the side of the net, maybe grazed the post, while Montreal's best early chance came when Demidov and Kapanen streaked in and were nearly able to work a great little give-and-go play, but they weren't able to get their sticks on it. They weren't able to get it by Wallstedt. Philippe Danault took a minor penalty for slashing in the offensive zone halfway into the period, and that gave the Wild a chance to take a really undeserved early lead. I've noticed that Danault has taken quite a few minor penalties since joining the Canadiens, and it's probably the aspect of his game that I've been most unhappy with since he's joined the team. The Wild didn't take long to get to work on the power play, and the Habs penalty kill folded early in this one. It's another power play goal against. This time, Vlad Tarasenko blasts a one-timer by Dobeš to give Minnesota a 1-0 lead on just their second shot of the period. Montreal needs to keep pushing and not allow this early goal to take them away from their game plan. They started the game really well. They need to keep going. They've been the better team early. And Montreal responds by keeping the pressure up. After a few less than dangerous looking shots, Philippe Danault atones for his earlier mistake by whacking home a rebound. It's his first goal in 51 games, and it could not have come at a better time. Montreal gets even before the end of the period, and they don't allow that early goal by the Wild to ruin their momentum. Montreal did get a shot on a power play, as Minnesota got called for a trip in the offensive zone, but Montreal's power play really struggled to generate any chances. Both units appeared way too generous and were making way too many passes rather than directing shots on net. Dobson did have the best look at the end of the power play when a slap shot from the point was deflected off of the leg of Kirby Dach, but it was swallowed up by Wallstedt, and Montreal couldn't take advantage of that power play. The Habs continued to control play for the remainder of the period, and they looked quite efficient, in particular in managing to deflect pucks that were headed towards the net. And in the final minute of play, Alexandre Carrier carried a puck in deep. He worked it to Demidov, who got it up to Matheson at the point. Carrier crossed in front of the net and got his stick onto the shot of Mike Matheson, deflecting it by Wallstedt and giving the Habs a late 2-1 lead. Montreal totally dominated the period. They outshot the Wild 14-2. They outchanced them badly, and they got into the intermission ahead by a goal with just the one blemish that was the penalty by Danault, which led to the power play goal by Tarasenko. It's exactly the kind of period you wanted to see the Canadiens put forward, especially with the Wild coming off of travel and having just played a game 24 hours earlier. So the teams move into the second period, and it was a very hesitant start to the second for both teams, with hardly anything getting to the net, and even less chances with any kind of a legitimate threat at going in. When finally about 5 minutes into the period, things started to open up a bit, with both teams starting to generate opportunities off the rush. Suzuki and Demidov in particular had really nice looks that Wallstedt had to be sharp to keep out of the back of the net, and as the period went on, the Wild continued to focus on maintaining control of the puck, in particular in the Canadiens zone, and they were trying to generate chances off the cycle. Dolbesch wasn't tested too often, and a lot of the shots he did face were from distance with traffic in front, and that strategy worked for the Wild, as a feeble-looking wrist shot from Brock Faber was thrown to the net, and it beat Dolbesch clean without even appearing to deflect off of anything. It was not a good goal against, and it was not an encouraging sign. Jayden Struble, really unimpressive tonight. He kept blowing plays at the offensive blue line. The Habs seemed to kind of fall asleep in this period until a nice energetic shift by the third line seemed to really reinvigorate them. It led to sustained pressure by Gallagher, Danault, and Anderson, and the second line seemed to build off of that, so Ivan Demidov and Lane Hutson, arguably the two hardest working players on the Habs roster, ended up teaming up for an absolutely gorgeous goal to make it 3-2 for the Montreal Canadiens. Demidov fooled everyone into thinking he was going to shoot. He slid it right onto the tape of Lane Hutson, who was able to blast a one-timer by Wallstedt, and he put the Canadiens back in front. It's hard to believe how good these two kids are so early in their careers. They are so young. It's just awesome. Montreal used that goal to regain momentum and control of the game, and Minnesota looked much less dangerous from that point on. The Canadiens eventually drew a penalty on Hartman when he got caught interfering with Suzuki, so with 1 minute and 39 seconds to go, the Canadiens had a golden opportunity with the power play to double their advantage. But that opportunity was quickly taken away, however, when Hudson got called for tripping, and this was the phantom call of all phantom calls. What on earth were the officials looking at here? Foligno tripped over the blue line, and apparently that's Hudson's fault? Probably the worst penalty I've seen called against the Canadiens this season, and there have been some absolute doozies, let me tell you. The teams went to 4-on-4 to close out the period. Nothing of note really occurred, and we end up going into the intermission with the Canadiens still up by a goal. The final 20 minutes should definitely be the Canadiens' best effort, as the Wild should be absolutely gassed at this point. They played last night in Toronto, like we said. They had to travel. Montreal's had multiple days off. The third period should be Montreal's strongest. Let's see if the Habs can make it through the third period without blowing a lead. And as far as the start to the period goes, it was another hesitant one for both teams with not very much happening. Very few shots were even attempted, and early on the Wild get called for another penalty, this time for tripping Suzuki. It sends the Habs to their third power play of the game, but the power play was again not very convincing by the Canadiens. They failed to even register a shot on goal, and worse than that, it kind of led to a momentum shift that saw the Wild take control of the play. And given that Minnesota was just coming off that game against Toronto, there was no way that Montreal should have been finding themselves on their back foot, but here we were. Similar to when Minnesota looked most effective in the second period, the Wild maintained control of the puck in the Canadiens zone near the perimeters, and they kept attempting to put shots on from distance. Jayden Struble continued to be an absolute disaster in this one. He tripped over nothing at the offensive blue line. I'm surprised the refs didn't call that a penalty, to be honest. It led to a rush for the Minnesota Wild and a series of chances which ended with Hudson being called for a hook and putting the Wild back on the power play. Montreal got a bit lucky here. Gallagher could have also been called for a cross-check, so the Wild go to the power play, and it is looking dicey early. Dolbesch made a pair of spectacular looking saves, but my goodness, they were not very confident looking. Everything was just looking really tough for Dolbesch tonight, and to make matters worse, Matheson then got called for a trip on Zuccarello, so the Wild had 45 seconds of 5-on-3 play to work with. They get a couple really nice looking chances. Dolbesch is able to keep a few out, but right after the first penalty expires, they just couldn't hold on any longer, and it was Tarasenko on the power play again from a tight angle this time. He put one by Dolbesch, who has looked out of sorts all night long, sliding all over the place, never seeming really in control, always seemingly on the brink of allowing a goal. Part of it is just the way he plays, it's his style, but he does have a bit of a confidence issue, I think. After the Wild tie it up though, Montreal finally seems to shift back into the gear for the last 6 minutes of the third. The first line gets a ton of looks, and Carrier even ends up ringing one off of the crossbar, but they just can't get it by Wallstedt to restore their lead. Another good shift by the third line led to more sustained pressure for the chances. Matheson got a couple shots. They were both pushed aside by Wallstedt, but the final minutes really belonged entirely to the Montreal Canadiens, as that travel and those consecutive games finally seemed to be catching up to the Wild. The Habs maintained pressure for the entire final minute and a half of the game, and the Wild were hanging on for dear life now. Suzuki set up Caufield, who didn't wait for overtime for his heroics. This time, he ripped a one-timer top corner by Wallstedt, and he gave the Canadiens a 4-3 lead with just 15 seconds left in the game. Montreal was not playing just to make overtime. They played for the win, and they were rewarded for it. I loved the way they came at the final minutes of the game. They really attacked the Minnesota Wild, and finally, those road legs on the second half of a back-to-back seemed to work in the Canadiens' favor, and they pulled off a late win with 2 crucial points against an elite, albeit very tired and ripe for the picking opponent in the Minnesota Wild. Cole Caufield continues to serve as Mr. Clutch for the Canadiens, another massive game-winning goal, and the Habs most importantly keep pace with the Lightning, the Sabres, and the Sens, all of whom picked up wins tonight, while distancing themselves from the Bruins, who lost to the Stars, as well as the other teams in the Atlantic who were idle tonight. Buffalo, who Montreal welcomes into the Bell Center on Thursday, sits just 4 points back of the Canadiens with a game in hand, and Thursday's matchup is going to have huge implications for the fate of the Atlantic. It's going to really determine if the Canadiens can get some breathing room, space themselves out just that much more from the wildcard teams, or find themselves right in the thick of a 7 or 8 team battle for those 2 final wildcard spots. Anyway, you guys, that's going to be it for me on this one. If you made it to the end of the video, please give us a like and a subscribe. It really helps out the channel. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below, and have a great night, guys.